Have you heard the story about Houston? It's the one everyone is telling, from city leaders to news reporters all around the world. It's a story that sounds like a modern-day miracle. They say America's fourth largest city has found the secret to solving homelessness. We've all seen the headlines celebrating a massive 60% drop in the number of people living on the streets. We've heard how they have managed to find homes for more than 25,000 people over the last decade. It's presented as a blueprint, a perfect plan that other cities should just copy and paste. It feels good to hear a success story like that, doesn't it? It gives you a little bit of hope that maybe this huge problem isn't so impossible to solve after all. But what if that beautiful story is like a shiny apple with a rotten core? What if I told you that beneath the surface of those celebrated numbers and smiling photo ops, there's a much darker and more complicated truth? A truth that suggests this celebrated success is built on a foundation that's beginning to crumble under the weight of its own promises. This isn't the story you'll find in the official press releases. It's a story of hidden suffering, of ticking time bombs, and of a system that might be closer to collapse than victory. What you're about to hear will peel back the layers of this so-called miracle. Stay with me, because the real story of Houston's homeless crisis is far worse and far more fragile than you could possibly imagine. Why Houston's homeless numbers don't add up. So, where do these celebrated numbers even come from? It's a fair question, but the answer is a bit like trying to build a skyscraper on shaky ground. The statistics we hear are based on something called the point-in-time count. Imagine trying to take a single photograph of a bustling city at midnight and claiming that picture captures everything that happens there all day. That's essentially what this count is. For one single night in January, volunteers go out and try to count every person they can find sleeping in shelters, under bridges, or in parks. It's a massive effort, but it's just a snapshot, a brief glimpse into a much larger storm. The problem is, homelessness is not a stationary target. It's a moving, breathing crisis that is very good at staying hidden. What about the people who aren't sleeping in a park that one specific night? Think about the mother with 2 kids sleeping in her car in a forgotten corner of a store parking lot, hoping no one notices them. Think about the family that just lost their apartment and is now squeezed onto the floor of a relative's living room, knowing they can't stay for long. Or the construction worker who uses his daily pay to get a cheap motel room for the night, just to do it all over again the next day. These people are what we call the hidden homeless. They are hanging on by a single thread, one emergency away from being on the street, yet they are completely invisible in the official numbers. They don't fit the neat definition, so they aren't counted. This makes you wonder, how can we declare that the problem is shrinking when we're not even looking at the whole picture? Houston's solution can be a nightmare. If you think the numbers are misleading, the reality of what comes next can be even more disturbing. Getting off the streets and into a home should be the end of a nightmare, but for too many, it's just the beginning of a different one. The Housing First model sounds perfect on paper, but the program is only as good as the homes it provides, and unfortunately, some of these homes are little more than traps with 4 walls and a roof. Imagine the wave of relief you'd feel, finally getting a key to your own place, only to open the door and find walls covered in black mold, a ceiling that's sagging from constant water leaks, or an apartment that's already home to families of roaches and rats. This isn't an exaggeration, it's the grim reality for people placed in properties that are falling apart. These aren't just isolated incidents. Investigative reports have uncovered entire apartment complexes used by the city's housing programs that are in deplorable condition. For the people living there, it feels less like a rescue and more like being moved from one crisis to another. One person described the feeling perfectly, saying they weren't helped. They were just gotten off city grounds, hidden away so no one else had to look at them. It's like taking all the city's trash and simply dumping it behind a fence where it can't be seen. It may make the front yard look clean for a little while, but the pile of garbage is still there, rotting away. So you have to ask yourself, is this really solving homelessness, or is it just hiding desperate people in dangerous buildings to keep the official success story alive? Houston's ticking time bomb, the coming financial crisis. The most terrifying part of this story isn't just the poor conditions of the housing, it's the fact that this entire system, flaws and all, is built on a foundation that's about to vanish. For the past few years, Houston's aggressive housing strategy was powered by a massive flood of temporary money from the federal government, largely as part of COVID-19 relief efforts. It was like giving a marathon runner a huge energy drink for the first few miles of the race. It made them look incredibly fast and strong, but it was never meant to last. Now, that one-time boost of cash is drying up, and the city is facing a brutal financial hangover. The well is running dry, and there's no clear plan for how to refill it. This isn't a distant problem for the future. The alarms are blaring right now. City officials themselves are openly warning that without a new, stable source of funding, the progress they've celebrated could be completely undone. They are talking about a future, just a year or two away, where thousands of the very people they housed could be pushed right back out onto the streets. The entire Houston model has been like a beautiful house of cards, built with temporary money. Now, a strong financial wind is blowing, and the whole thing is threatening to collapse. What happens when the rent subsidies stop? What happens when the caseworkers are laid off? For thousands of people, this isn't a budget debate, it's a countdown to potential disaster. The revolving door, when a new start becomes a dead end. When a system fails on such a large scale, the personal stories of heartbreak get lost in the noise. We are told that the program has a high success rate, that most people who get housing stay in it. But this statistic hides a painful truth. What does success really mean if the person in that home is isolated, miserable, and unsupported? For some, the new apartment isn't a sanctuary, it's a cage. They find themselves stuck in a revolving door, getting pushed into housing only to spin right back out onto the streets a year or two later, feeling more defeated than when they started. Consider the story of a man named Tyrone, a poet who lived on the streets of Houston. He got into the program and was given a home, a supposed fresh start. But the reality of his situation, the lack of genuine support and the daily struggles he faced, became too much to bear. He eventually made a heartbreaking choice. He would rather be homeless again than stay in the housing he was given. His story shines a light on the biggest missing piece in this puzzle. A key is not a cure. Without real, consistent support for the deep trauma, mental health battles and addiction struggles that so many face, a new apartment is just a temporary pause, not a permanent solution. How many other people are like Tyrone, their quiet failures completely buried under the loud celebration of misleading statistics? The crime of being homeless in Houston. If the system fails you, what happens next? For those left on the streets, the city has a second, much harsher answer. While one hand of Houston offers the promise of housing, the other is armed with a rulebook that makes the simple act of survival a crime. They call them civility ordinances, but for the people with nowhere else to go, they feel anything but civil. These rules make it illegal to do the very things you must do to survive on the street, sitting or lying down on a sidewalk, or even keeping your few worldly possessions with you. And these aren't just for certain hours, they are in effect 24 hours a day in large parts of the city. Imagine losing everything, and just as you're trying to catch your breath on a public bench, you're told that resting is against the law. This approach doesn't solve homelessness, it just makes it invisible. It's a cruel game of hide and seek, where the city tries to push its most vulnerable residents into the shadows, into industrial backstreets and wooded areas far from the public eye. This doesn't just hide the problem, it makes it more dangerous. It pushes people farther away from outreach workers, meal services, and any chance of getting help. It's like telling a sick person they can't be in the hospital waiting room because it looks bad. You have to wonder, is this about public safety, or is it about making poverty disappear so that it doesn't bother anyone else? The breaking point, why Houston's helpers are giving up. In the middle of this broken system are the outreach workers and case managers, the on-the-ground soldiers tasked with fighting this impossible war. They are the ones who are supposed to connect people with the housing and services we hear so much about. They are the human engine of the Houston model, but that engine is sputtering and on the verge of breaking down. These are the people we expect to perform miracles, yet we give them an empty toolbox to do it. Imagine being a firefighter sent to a 5-alarm fire with nothing but a bucket of water. That's the reality for many of these workers every single day. They are drowning in overwhelming caseloads, trying to be a lifeline for dozens, sometimes hundreds of people at once, but the true cost is the emotional toll, the constant heartbreak. Think about what it must feel like to earn someone's trust, promise them a safe home, and then have to place them in a run-down, moldy apartment because it's the only thing available. Think about having to look someone in the eyes and tell them there are no shelter beds left tonight, sending them back to the dangers of the street. This constant exposure to suffering and systemic failure leads to burnout. Experienced, compassionate workers are leaving their jobs in droves, exhausted and defeated. And when these dedicated people quit, the system doesn't just bend, it breaks a little more, leaving the most vulnerable people in our society with even less hope than they had before. Houston's mirage, the truth beyond the headlines. So where does that leave us? We started with a story of triumph, a city praised for solving one of society's toughest problems, but we've peeled back the curtain. We've seen that the official numbers don't tell the whole story. We've walked through the doors of housing that is anything but a safe haven. We've seen the financial cliff that the entire program is about to drive off, and we've heard the quiet stories of those for whom the system was a revolving door back to despair. We've seen how the city punishes those it fails to help, and how the very people on the front lines are burning out from the weight of it all. The inescapable conclusion is this: the Houston success story is a dangerous mirage. The crisis is worse than we think, not because there haven't been good intentions or some real successes, but because the foundation of the entire model is fragile, unsustainable, and riddled with hidden failures. It's a warning that you can't solve a deep human crisis with misleading statistics and temporary funding. We have to look beyond the easy headlines and demand real, dignified, and sustainable solutions. We have to remember the human faces behind the numbers. What are your thoughts on this? Do you see Houston as a model to be copied or as a cautionary tale? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you believe these kinds of hidden stories need a voice, make sure you subscribe to the channel and join a community that looks for the truth.